What you're going to see is an example of a double closing with a first leg, or A to B, done with a student using partners financing. Turned out to be for hard money rates, but nonetheless he had a partner. Seller A, bank owned, this is an REO property, sells to buyer B, which is our student, who then sells it to buyer C, the end buyer, who in this case was an individual. Not all REOs have deed restrictions. This is one that didn't have it. No money in the deal. Student got the money from a partner. No credit. No conventional lender involved. No risk, since he had no money in the deal himself. And the partner backed out originally, but came back because of the liens being taken by the end buyer. Student's first deal, and what I did is I actually decided to go ahead and use the student's own words because they're sort of very interesting, as you'll see. So this was the student's first deal, and he said it was the most stressful deal he ever had. As he's done a number of them since then, he can talk from experience. It was an REO that no one wanted because it had accumulated over $32,000 in liens. Now in our realm of liens, that's not a giant one. We've had them in the $1 million category on houses that weren't worth $100,000. He remembered that I always said when everybody else runs, go in, and he did. He remembers going in to see the war house, and it looked like a bomb shelter. It had been torn apart on the inside. Scrap anything in there had been carried out. But he already had it under contract for $32,500. This is not uncommon. We make blind offers. Once we know we're going to get the property under contract or have it under contract, then we go and see what we've got. Otherwise, we'd lose it to another investor, and we can always renegotiate, as you will see in a moment. After seeing it, he renegotiated for $22,000, $10,500 reduction, and he got it. Now remember, this is an REO selling well below the listing price, which may not be what you're hearing in your area. He had over 30 calls on this property, but as soon as everybody saw the lien search, they ran. And that's unusual because these are amateurs. A good investor would have, or a seasoned investor would have been in there all over it. After much debate, we insisted we were going to risk our deposit because I just had the feeling it was going to work. That gut feeling cannot be productive in some cases. I'm conservative, but in this case you'll see it worked out. I think what was important is the comment by the student that if he lost the $1,000, he would have zero in his bank account. And that was extremely stressful for himself at the time. When it came time to close, however, he still had no buyers. We were trying to get a power of attorney from the seller, this is the bank, to try and mitigate the liens before the closing. It's very unusual for a bank to allow that to happen. They frankly just don't care. Also, if you give a power of attorney, then in this case, the student buyer would actually have authorization from the lender to work on their behalf. Very unusual for it to happen. Actually, I've never seen it done. The seller agreed initially, but at the last second he bailed out and said he wouldn't give it to us. Probably was a new asset manager. When he asked his boss said, "What, are you crazy?" So after fighting with the realtor and pushing for extension after extension, the seller, the bank, finally said no more. Now, look at this. Extension after extension. For you guys who are saying REOs, they never give an extension. You know they're going to give an extension because they have a per diem charge in their contract. They wouldn't have a per diem charge if in fact they weren't going to give an extension if they felt there was a valid reason for it. So by this time they had plenty of buyers, but we had to mitigate the liens for them to take it. So what they decided to do is go ahead and close, fix the liens with the city's amnesty program, and then sell it for $50,000. Expected to make some real money for it. Fix and close and fix the liens could have cost another $10,000 or $15,000, and it may not have been able to sell for $50,000. But it was the vision they had, and moving forward, I think they pretty much changed their mind, as you'll see in a moment. The actual day of closing, the student's partner backed out and said he would not fund the deal simply because the bank was giving them a quit claim deed. That means the bank was literally saying, we will have no responsibility for the property whatsoever. Now, typically, the bank always gives a restricted warranty deed or limited warranty deed, which is nearly as good as a quitclaim deed to them because it says only during the time that we owned it are we responsible for anything that happened to it. In addition, they generally have you sign a hold harmless agreement as part of their addendum, and they cover themselves. So if you come back and say, nah, you didn't tell me about this, they're going to say it doesn't matter. Read your contract. This is contract law. It's pretty much black and white. After convincing his partner about the amnesty program, he ended up funding the deal the morning after They were supposed to close, and the bank went ahead and closed. These amnesty programs are gigantic money makers for us. Stay in touch with the city that you're in or the county. Find out if they're going to have an amnesty program coming and work those into your deals, especially deals you're looking at where they have huge liens attached. Everybody else is running from them. At any rate, they finally found a woman buyer through a FSBO sign outside the house who loved the property and wanted it, and she said she'd pay $38,000. Remember, they have it at 22.5, 38 looks pretty good. He told her the only way he would consider selling it to her, though, is if she would take it with the liens. This is very common. And when he does the B2C transaction, what he has to do is have her sign a hold harmless agreement. Many of the wholesalers in parts of the country, as a standard operating procedure, have the end buyer sign a hold harmless agreement to start with. So they had to call their contractor and have him stop what was scheduled for a demolition of a wall that the city said they would consider negotiating the liens if they did certain things to the property, one of which was an added wall. Cities don't like added walls because they consider them a safety hazard. If the fire department has to come in and they can't find their way through a myriad of small rooms in one of these houses that's been cut up into extra bedrooms. So we locked it up with her and explained to her how to mitigate the fines. This is very important. You need your end buyer to go to the city with you, preferably, and get a comfort level that this is going to happen just the way you've told them. It's a deal closer for you. Well, she went to the city and came back crying because the city told her they reduced 4 of them to 10% of the amount, but one of them they'd only take 50% for. So it turned out that was about $6,000 over her budget. So it's not a deal killer yet, and the option here is go ahead and do all the work yourself, pull permits, wait for a buyer, and so on. So they ended up splitting the difference with her, so it sold for $35,000. This was his first deal, and it makes for a good story. And he said in his original email to me that he had an upset stomach for 2 weeks after this because it was so stressful for him. But that can happen in real estate investing if you let it happen to you. His risk in this deal, even though that $1,000 earnest money deposit was critical to him at the time, was really limited to that exposure. So here's the HUD-1 closing statement for the A to B transaction, page 1. I hope you can see these numbers pretty well. There's the $22,500 price the student was paying for the property. Again, seller gets the same price. These are the closing costs from page 2, which we're going to see for the student buyer. Left side, always the buy side, sell side, always on the right side. Now you'll see that the student on here put up what looks like a $2,000 deposit. However, his partner put up $1,000 of the $2,000 deposit, and his partner put a $20,000 note on the property, which is right here, as part of the closing cost, the money that was needed. Now this is, I brought this up a second ago, but these are the closing costs for the seller from page 2, which we're going to see. As you can see, it's $3,500, while it's only a little over $1,000 for a student. These are, again, the county taxes that are due, and as you can see, they're always going to be the same. They're a credit to the buyer and a debit to the seller. So here's the bottom line. The student had to come up with $37 at closing, and the seller collected what looks like $16,000. Doesn't matter. The seller is the lender. So here's page 2 of the HUD, and we're going to look and see who got what. First of all, there's a $2,000 commission to the agent. $2,000 over $22,500. Sounds an awful lot like over 9% commission. Now, his buddy that loaned him the money, his partner, charged him 3 points up front, or about $600, and he had some additional charges for him, the note preparation, and another junk fee involved in it. So here's the attorney's closing costs. They're usual and typical, an abstract or title search. These are just the usual closing costs you're going to run into, and you can see what they are here if you want to take the time. They're incidental. Compared to what we're looking at, they're just absolutely incidental. Now these are utilities that weren't paid to the city for a certain time period and a second time period. Again, incidental charges. This is what the student had to pay, about, it looks like about $1,500. And the largest amount of this $3,000 that the seller had to pay was the $2,000 commission to the agent. So let's look at where the money is. This is the closing statement for the B2C side. This is page 1, of course. There's the $35,000 sale price that he renegotiated with the end buyer from $38,000 to split the difference on the liens. the overage that she was over $6,000. So half of that's $3,000. Buyer and the seller. The buyer is the end buyer. The student is the seller in this case. And here's the end buyer's closing cost, $747. Now, this particular HUD statement has the county taxes actually put in a different part of the HUD. Typically, they're down below in this section. They're $248 roughly. This is the closing cost from page 2 for the seller, which was the student in this case. We're going to look and see why there's so much money there, $3,000. Here's the payoff of the note to his partner, and that's the end buyer's deposit of $5,000. Now, once again, what the student did is he had the ability to get a larger deposit than he had up. So if in the event that the end buyer flaked out at the last minute, the C buyer, she would have lost her $5,000 deposit. And if he couldn't close, he would have lost his $2,000 deposit, half of which was his and half of which was his partner's. So they still would have made $3,000 on the transaction. So here's the bottom line. The buyer had to bring in $30,994, and our seller got $11,858.91. Now remember, this includes the refund of his deposit. So we're going to take that into account by reducing his profit from $11,000 to $9,000. All right, so here is page 2. We can look at what these costs are. Here's the settlement or closing cost and the abstract or title fee. And this is the actual title insurance. And these are the miscellaneous costs that we always talk about being, whatever they are. Here, more importantly, is real estate taxes due, the lien search, and a stormwater utility bill. Now, this is the same one. So the student had to bring in $3,000, predominantly because of the real estate taxes being paid, which were not paid by the original seller, and also the end buyer had only to bring in $747.75. The final result of this transaction was the student purchased the property off the MLS as an REO. The deal had fallen through before because other investors simply had passed on it with $37,000 in outstanding liens, which were more than the price the lender was trying to get for the property. The student put it under contract and later got a price reduction that made the deal and his profit in the deal. While he had over 30 offers on the property, everyone ran when they saw the lien issues. Again, these are not pros. Serious investors would look into the liens. Money is in solving the liens. The more the issues, the more the money ultimately. Now, not every deal can be negotiated for the liens. Some of them you have to walk away from, but if you don't look at all of them, you're not going to find out what really makes them tick. He would have been virtually penniless, according to him, if he'd lost his deposit. His buyer put up a $5,000 earnest money deposit, and had she not closed, he would have made $3,000 because he would have lost his deposit of $1,000 plus his partner's $1,000 deposit. So the student's net profit for the $37 he had to bring to closing plus his $1,000 out-of-pocket deposit money was $9,821.81 after paying back his hard money loan.